may finally be inducing young people out of their parents' basements. You know, for the first 10 years after the financial crisis, or for much of the Obama period, and it's not necessarily the fault of President Obama because he came in at the end of the the height of the global financial crisis in late 08, early 09. But a lot of young people, including people in their 30s, were actually living with their parents. That is not happening now. According to the Wall Street Journal, the anecdotal evidence from employers who say they can't find enough workers. Meanwhile, manufacturing is at an 18-year high. Manufacturers have reported employing high school students. Employers are also raising wages, which have climbed 2.7% in the last 12 months. You know, we all too often heard in the 2016 election campaign from Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the right, railing against wage stagnation in the United States. And these mainly affected white working class folks in predominantly democratic states. There you go. Employers are raising wages which have climbed 2.7% in the last 12 months. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this fast food outlet, but it's Chick-fil-A. It's a bit like an upmarket KFC. But in Sacramento this past week, it said it would increase worker pay to $17 per hour to reduce employee turnover. I think the minimum wage in the United States, it varies according to the states, but it's something like $10. $17 American dollars is more or less what the Australian minimum wage is. So that's a huge increase. Walmart last week announced plans to subsidise college tuition for employers. This is extraordinary. It's never happened before. The Wall Street Journal last week reported that a Colorado company is trying to lure more plumbers by offering not more money, but craft beer, a putting green, and, quote, a lot of zen. I mean, I prefer cash, but I don't judge millennials. Everything that should be up. Business, consumer confidence, incomes, growth, obviously. Yeah, it's about 3 to 3.5% growth rates is up. And everything that should be down, unemployment, inflation, interest rates, is down. Meanwhile, the shale gas revolution, this is the free market revolution known as fracking, that continues to mean that the United States is becoming energy efficient and is on the cusp of being energy independent for the first time in generations. Now, admittedly, this process started due to technological innovation in the Obama years, but President Trump has not stopped the shale gas revolution. If anything, he's egged it on. The upshot is that President Trump's tax reforms, his deregulation agenda, appears to be working. Now, I have a caveat, and I say this as a free trader and a free marketeer. I'm worried, however, that his protectionist trade policies might spoil the party. But I don't want to complicate my argument now. Yes, Dominic is right. And I said this time and again throughout 2016 when I, along all the so-called experts, thought that the Donald would not win. You're right. He is a rude, crude, lewd, I would even argue buffoon. Who, and I think to put it politely and mildly, Dominic, Donald Trump is incapable of understatement. I think that's true.
Good.
But he's also not a quintessential politician, is he?
No. He's a reality TV star, that's why.
He campaigned on 4 key issues. Pulling the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, putting tariffs on Chinese goods, pulling out of the Paris climate change accords, and pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. In the course of the last 18 months, he has done precisely that. Here is a guy who says what he said he'd do. He's doing what he said he'd do. It's quite extraordinary. In this day and age, politicians on the left, the right, Liberal, Labor, Republican, Democrat, Tory, Labor, they flip and flop. The power of their U-turns and reverse gears are up to best international standards. Here's a guy who's put into practice what he said he'd do in 2016. This is quite extraordinary.
Where's the wall? Where's Mexico?
Well, that's a good point. That's a very good point. But I think you've just reminded me, on that note, Dominic, like many people who are very critical of the Donald, will fret and wail that Trump is an authoritarian and that he can just be a fascist and put into place what he says he'll do. But in the United States, classic liberal democracy, there is a thing called checks and balances. So on that question, you can't get everything through the legislature or the courts. The courts, whether it be the Supreme Courts or the legislature, whether it's the House of Representatives and the Senate, even though they're controlled by Republicans, still keep the Donald's agenda honest, and that's why he can't get some of these things through. But nevertheless, those 4 key issues, these are controversial policies. He's put those policies into place. And I'm always struck when I'm interviewed by my colleagues about this issue, how outrageous this is. But these are the same journalists who all too often slam a politician for changing their position after the election.
Correct.
You know, he's putting into place what he said he'd do. So I think that deserves recognition. Dominic rails against the isolationism of the Trump administration. Well, I'm not sure how bombing the Assad regime in Damascus is evidence of isolationism. But leaving all that aside, I think clearly what distinguishes Trump from his 2 immediate predecessors, President Bush, the Republican, and President Obama, is that he instinctively does not want America to get bogged down in unwinnable quagmires in the Middle East.
Exactly.
Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. He does not want to get America bogged down in these misbegotten ventures that cost America dearly in prestige and credibility.
Exactly right.
And I think, you know, given that the United States, the American people, as all the available public polling evidence indicates, are tired of the world, they're war-weary, they are suffering from foreign policy fatigue, his message in some respects resonates with those folks. Dominic mentioned NATO. NATO is indeed a great creation, a strategic alliance that was built at the height of the Cold War in the mid to late 1940s, and it played a very distinguished record in containing Soviet power. Trump and his advisors still commit to the Atlantic Alliance. But I think Trump instinctively recognises that we're talking about an alliance fighting against or containing a threat that has ceased to exist for nearly 30 years. The Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989. The Soviet Empire collapsed in the late 80s and early 1990s. Surely, with changed circumstances, you change your foreign policy. And add to that, 24 out of the 28 NATO states are primarily subsidised by the American taxpayer. How is that fair? They're Trump's instincts. He would like to go through with them, but he can't because the Republicans in his own party and Democrats who are wedded to this idea that America should be the global leader, the Pax Americana, even though the United States, since the end of the Cold War, we're talking nearly 30 years now, 24 or 25 of those 30 years, the Americans have been at war. And frankly, most of those wars have been a disaster. Trump recognises that. Now I know how you feel, Dominic. I think that's all right. I think the other point to bear in mind is that Trump. You're going to love this one, and Dominic. You know, we're being very respectful here. Dominic, in many respects, reflects the conventional wisdom on this question of Russiagate. You know, this idea that the Trump campaign was in cahoots or in collusion with the Kremlin throughout the course of the 2016 election. Yet despite all the various inquiries, House, Senate, FBI, and we still, of course, to be fair, have to await the findings of the Mueller Special Prosecution, despite all the efforts of the top investigative journalists at the Washington Post, the New York Times and the CNN, there is still no smoking gun that links the Trump campaign with the Kremlin in 2016. Crikey, did you even know that the FBI still hasn't had access to those DNC computers and hard drives?
Yes,
Democratic National Committee, Democratic National Committee, all those emails. That, by the way, those emails showed, you know who was in cahoots? It was a Hillary Clinton campaign with the Democratic establishment to deny the left-wing challenger Bernie Sanders the nomination. We're leaving that aside.
Yeah, their own goal.
Well, that's a good point. But the point here is that the FBI still has not had access to those servers. All the intelligence that apparently points the finger of blame to the Russians, that's what they say, the Russians, not the Kremlin, to hacking the DNC and Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, that remains classified. Now I ask you, and in particular a lot of my left-wing friends who make this argument in defence of the intelligence, was the American intelligence services right about the pay of pigs in 1961? Were they right about the Tet Offensive in the late 60s in Vietnam? Were they right about Iraq's WMD? So I say to all those who think we should accept absolutely the classified information from the intelligence to be a bit sceptical what you hear. My point here tonight is that Trump's victory, and I disagreed with Donald Trump, I didn't think he'd win, but the point here is Trump's victory has seriously unhinged the broad cross-section of not just Democrats, not just even some Republicans, especially those neoconservatives who've never known a war they haven't supported. It's also upset the sensibilities of the media establishment in the United States and around the world. So in conclusion, what makes Donald Trump, I'm reluctant to say triumph, that's Miranda's role, but I will say Trump distinguishes himself for being a disruptor. You know, and he is part of what I would argue a global phenomenon. If you go across continental Europe, you're seeing all sorts of nativist, nationalist, populist movements on the left and the right. You can disagree with these groups, but there is a contempt for the Western elite. You saw it at Brexit. You saw it on November 8, 2016 with Trump's election. You just saw it the other day in Italy, where a collection of far left and far right populists got together to knock off the Italian establishment. This is happening across the Western world. Hasn't happened in this country, and that's another debate altogether. I think we distinguish ourselves because of economic growth rates and our immigration policy. But nevertheless, Trump is not an isolated incident. He represents, in many respects, a global phenomenon. So I don't say triumph for Donald Trump, but I don't say it's a tragedy. I think it's more complicated, and I think it would help if the critics of Donald Trump would try to take him and his movement a little bit more seriously.
Correct.
Now, at this point, I will tell you that our next forum in the Roundtable series on Wednesday, August the 8th, is called The Death of Free Speech. A lot of you have little forward flyers, speakers not yet highlighted, because we don't yet have a raft of speakers. It'll be the 45th forum in a Roundtable series, mostly on Tuesday, but this one, for booking reasons, will be on Wednesday, August the 8th, at 6 p.m. in this room. The Death of Free Speech. Don't miss it, August the 8th. Now, at this point,
it's important to distinguish between what the aspects of Donald Trump that are simply a Republican, probably at the Tea Party end of the spectrum, set of policies, set of beliefs and set of views. And those are things that, you know, in a democracy, the left get a go, the right get a go. That's fine. That's the way it is supposed to be. The pendulum, as Barack Obama said when Trump got elected, the pendulum swings both ways. And I think that's probably about right. I think it would be a very poor democracy if either side had a mortgage on power. I also think that what Tom said about the consensus, the elites that have, particularly in America, have had a stranglehold on power, that has been problematic. And I can completely understand why many people in rural America, in the small towns, felt that Trump was their guy. But I'm here to tell you that Trump sold them a pup. Trump is not the guy who cares about those people. Trump is the guy that comes in and unleashes a massive tax cut for wealthy people. That wealth is not going to trickle down. And let's see what happens. And I would have loved nothing more than Trump to go in and look after dancing with the ones who brought him there, because they were forgotten people. Hillary Clinton had nothing for those people. I think that's true. I think that's a fair point. Hillary was more of the same. But Donald Trump has also been, in some ways, more of the same. He packed his cabinet with people from Goldman Sachs just like the Bushes and Obamas to begin with. And Donald Trump is only about one person, or possibly a couple of other members of his family. It's all about him. He is a massive narcissist. He doesn't. His command of facts is completely flexible. He doesn't seem to believe in any principle. Tom talked about him delivering on what he said. Yes, okay. There's a certain primal irritation. He thinks America's had a rough deal, that it's been ripped off by its allies. It hasn't. There might, and okay, perhaps even some of that stuff needs to be adjusted. But he's not going to deliver many people on the right what they want. That's why it's been so disappointing to so many Republicans. It is all about him. The principles shift to fit the completely narcissistic view of the world. He does not care about any of the principles. And when I came here today, I deduced from the idea of the Western Forum that this was a group that looked at the cherished values. I didn't make. I made only perhaps a partly left-wing argument against Trump. I spoke a lot about the institutions of America that are so precious and so valuable in a conservative way, because I don't think I've learned, as someone who's historically been on the left, I haven't learned to appreciate the institutions of America until I've seen Donald Trump come and trash them. I've seen his contempt for the rule of law. That's what really frightens me about Donald Trump. It's the completely instinctive self-regard. It's the moral flexibility at all points. It's the impulsiveness of his negotiations with nuclear powers. God, I hope he makes peace with North Korea. He speaks unhinged dictator better than any president we've had in quite some time. But I'm not convinced that he will, because I think the real secret of Donald Trump is the same as those poor suckers who paid 35 grand to go to Trump University. He doesn't care about them. Those poor would-be entrepreneurs who signed up wanting a better life, who enrolled in his university because they believed in him. If you believe in Donald Trump, he will let you down. He does it to everybody, and we will see this happen in the years ahead. Russia, whatever. The ultimate tragedy of Donald Trump is that he cannot see past his own interests. He doesn't care about the people who elected him there, and I certainly hope in their interest someone comes along who actually looks after the people who elected him. Thank you.
And now a few words from Tom Switzer, please.
I think it's interesting that Donald Trump, who has clearly upset the sensibilities of polite society and the establishment, he clearly resonates with a lot of those folks who are just so sick and tired of politics. The thing that struck me about the 2016 election, we all know that he didn't win the popular vote, but in the United States, presidential elections are determined by the Electoral College vote. And Trump won 4 key Midwestern Rust Belt states that are very difficult for Republicans to win. Wisconsin, the last time Wisconsin voted Republican was in 1984 when Ronald Reagan was re-elected in a landslide. Last time Michigan voted Republican, I think, was 1988. George H.W. Bush defeated Michael Dukakis. The last time Pennsylvania went Republican, I think, was also in 1988. Ohio is a swing state. That usually backs the winner in each presidential election. But those 3 other Rust Belt states, quintessential white working class folks. And I'll never forget, in the week leading up to November 6, 2016, I emailed a friend who happened to be a former advisor to President Obama, so she was obviously a Democrat. And she said to me, because we've been talking throughout the year about, what do we think about Trump? Does he really have a chance to defeat Hillary Clinton? And we both agreed that Clinton would have enough electoral college votes to win the election. But I asked her a week beforehand, and she said, Tom, I had a friend driving around Milwaukee, just the outskirts of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and she saw a bumper sticker, and the bumper sticker read, "Vote Trump, no one will know." And I think this is a very interesting term, the shy Trump voter. A lot of people, because it was a politically incorrect thing to tell pollsters how they were going to vote on the day, they kept it to themselves. You may have heard the term the shy Tory voter. It came about in the 1992 election. I think it was John Major who was supposed to lose to the Labor leader Neil Kinnock. The shy Tory voters told the pollsters that Labor was going to win that election. Well, they didn't. They turned out for the racist Tory party. So I think there is a big disconnect between many of my colleagues in intellectual life, journalists, in the arts community. I've spent most of my life in an ivory tower, whether it be university or in journalism, Fairfax or News Limited. And for the best part of a decade, I worked at the University of Sydney, at the US Studies Centre, where no one saw Trump coming. And I think it's a reminder that we so-called experts need to get out more and understand what a lot of ordinary people feel. I think a lot of ordinary people recognise that Trump has his weaknesses and his flaws. As I said, he's a rude, crude guy. But, well, he is, I'm sorry. There's things he said about women and John McCain. We could go on, and I had that in my original remarks, but we won't go there now. The point here is that they recognise, and Michael Moore, the left-wing documentary maker, he got onto this right from the outset. Yeah, I know, but he got Trump right. He said consistently throughout 2016, the only guy I remember saying this consistently, that Trump would win because he would resonate with a lot of those white working class folks who feel like they're culturally alienated.
Yep, like here in Australia.
Yeah, I think it's much better here than there, but I get your point. And I think, cultural alienation, economic angst, foreign policy fatigue. And Michael Moore said something that I'll never forget. They recognise that Trump has his flaws, but they see him as a human Molotov cocktail that they want to throw at Washington and New York. And that's precisely what happened.
Now, when we take questions, hello there. When we take questions, would you excuse me, please? I just have to continue with this and speak to you later on that interesting issue. When we take questions, I'd like to remind you that the reputation of the Roundtable Forum is at stake. We didn't invite speakers here in order to have them slagged. Therefore, although you may disagree totally and utterly with what a speaker's point of view is, you will respect that speaker as a person of integrity and of intellect. That's why we're here. We're not here to have people slagged. Just remember what I said, and I know. And when you put your hand up, tell me which speaker you would like to direct your question to, and only one speaker and only one question per person. Who's the first? Yes, which speaker?
Tom Switzer.
Tom, please come up.
Think of Switzerland.
Tom, I'm interested in your thoughts on why we don't have a US ambassador, and Admiral Harry Harris was picked. And it says a lot about, I want your thoughts on where that places the US-Australian relationship, or just how important Australia really thinks we are when we're going to be spending $200 million, as we're spending now, in the Defence White Paper, becoming essentially a naval extension of the US. like your thoughts on that.
Well, the first point I'd say is that the US alliance has been, since the end of World War II and the onset of the Cold War, has been, is and will continue to be the centrepiece of Australian foreign policy for the foreseeable future. I see no reason why that should change. It's understandable that people are upset with the Trump administration being so slow in nominating an ambassador designate for confirmation hearings in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I think it is very regrettable, but bear in mind we have been here before. A lot of people forget this, but at the height of the war on the terror during the Bush years in 2006, 2007, when both Washington and Canberra had very close security relations, the United States, I think for 18 months, did not fill the void. We didn't have an ambassador here during that period, and that was only a bit more than a decade ago, so we've been there before. I think one of the many criticisms you can make about this administration is that it's been derelict in its duty in nominating quality candidates to be confirmed for important international posts, and this is just one among many. Harry Harris would have been the right person, but of course he's been seconded to South Korea, which arguably, from America's national security perspective and the perspective of Northeast Asia, is far more important to the world and to American foreign policy than Canberra. I think the rise of China means that we have to be very careful how we deal with the Americans. I think that we have supported the United States in every major foreign policy